Welcome to this presentation on social skills, wellbeing and self-advocacy. I'm Ginny Matthew, a functional vision assessor with the Vision Impairment Service, and I work with Emma and Julie, the two vision impairment teachers. I must apologise at the beginning of this presentation for some technical problems, and there will be some crackly sounds at the beginning of some of these tape recordings. But I've tried to speak after the initial crackles, so if you bear with it, it should settle down eventually. You might want a blindfold for one of the exercises in the presentation, but it's not essential if you're happy to just close your eyes. I'd allow about 40 minutes for doing the whole presentation. It's about 20 minutes of slides and a few videos to watch. Thank you. So what do we mean by social skills, well-being and advocacy? Sharon Sachs defines social skills as a set of behaviour or series of actions that all human beings use to interact or communicate with one another, bound by social rules created by a community or culture. If you look up well-being, you'll find something along the lines of well-being is the experience of health, happiness and prosperity. It includes having good mental health, high life satisfaction, a sense of meaning or purpose, and ability to manage stress. More generally, well-being is just feeling well. The two are interlinked, good social skills being the foundation of well-being. Self-advocacy is the ability to communicate to other people your wishes and needs, and it can often be difficult to express these well. As very young children, we often say things like, I want, and have a tantrum if we don't get it. But we usually also learn that doesn't usually get us very far. We need to refine our communication, and it has to be learned usually through observing other people doing it well. Social skills such as the ability to communicate with and enjoy the company of others, share experiences and feelings, and empathise are the foundation for a happy life. Without them, we wouldn't have close relationships. They're also really important when it comes to a career. We probably all know of people in high places who don't have many social skills, and there are some funny, offensive or embarrassing examples on TV, such as Basil Fawlty, David Brent in The Office. But when we think of colleagues we'd rather work with or prefer as leaders of any kind, social skills do count for a lot. But no one really formally teaches us all of these. There is some teaching in PSHE, but that's just once a week usually. Most social learning takes place all the time that we're interacting with and observing other people. It's a complex subject, and this presentation won't cover everything, but we'll look at some of the main things, starting with aspects of social learning at different ages. The link on this slide is to a 5-minute YouTube clip that describes some of the issues that a child with vision impairment might face in school. So I'd like you to watch that now before we go on to the next slide. Thanks. A severe vision impairment can adversely affect our first and most important social interactions with parents and then with siblings and peers, learning from each other through imitation, taking turns, playing games and sharing toys. Those of us with good sight don't notice how much all this depends on vision to understand what's happening and how to join in social interactions. Babies and young children with vision impairment can learn these skills, but they need all that visual information to be made accessible through their other senses, or if old enough to understand language, through verbal explanations of what's happening. In addition, other people, especially parents, need to be aware that a child with vision impairment might react differently to their sighted peers. For example, instead of looking towards you when they're paying attention to you, a child with vision impairment might just go really still or even look downwards. If we know about these differences, our interactions can flow just as easily and automatically as with sighted children. I've added a link to a video. I would like you to play it without watching it first, either with a blindfold or close your eyes, and just use the sound information. What do you think's happening during the video? Note down everything you can, and then play it again, and this time watch the video and note all the examples of any communication that's going on without words. When you've finished, you can go on to the next slide. Throughout life, many social behaviours are typically learned through sight. For example, the first one, eye contact, is the most obvious, but all aspects of body language and facial expressions. And these can also change the meaning of the words we're saying when we're talking to each other. For example, if I look up at the ceiling while I'm making a statement, or if someone winks at me while they're saying something. Also, how someone looks at us can affect how we feel about them. To go back to the example of eye contact, if I'm talking to someone, I usually expect them to look at me. But someone with a severe vision impairment wouldn't necessarily know to do this automatically. They may need to be taught that for sighted people, it can feel as if they're not paying attention. Bear in mind too that communication is two-way. It's often said if communication breaks down, it's both people's problem. Teaching young people with vision impairment about social skills includes them understanding social rules of the sighted world, but sighted people also need to understand the perspective of those with vision impairment as well. Peers and school staff all need to be involved. Adolescence is an age when people become more self-aware, and peer pressure is probably at its greatest. There's a strong need to feel part of a social group in order to develop an identity for yourself. It can be a really difficult age for anybody. Some teenagers are also learning to drive, with increasing independence and freedom that can bring. A teenager with severe vision impairments just like any other teenager in wanting to fit in with their friends. But vision impairment could mean that he or she won't be able to learn to drive, and they might need to use different specialist equipment like IT or a brailler or a cane, which makes them stand out from their peers. It's really important we all work with a young person so they can accept and talk about their vision impairment with peers and others. As with all young people, we need to accentuate their strengths and positive attributes and the benefits that any technology can bring. Ideally, this should have been done from a very early age so it became normalised for everybody, both the individual and their peers, so that nobody thinks anything of them. We also need to ensure that young people with vision impairment have all the skills they need to access information independently. For mobility, self-advocacy, we also need effective listening and other communication skills. It's a myth that blind people's sense of touch or hearing are better than sighted people's. Someone with a vision impairment can be extremely proficient at using their other senses, but it's learned and usually involves lots of practice. When it comes to career choices, someone with vision impairment might not be as aware of all the options of career there are in the first place, or what qualifications are needed, what choices for higher education there are. They also need to be made aware of their rights to support for access to work, knowledge of discrimination legislation, and how to discuss the issue of vision impairment in a college or job interview, focusing on what they can do and what they can bring to the workplace. This slide is not ideal, not very vision impairment friendly, but it's a diagram from Graham Douglas that made a presentation at Birmingham University on the QTVI course. And it's only put here for your information. You don't need to read all of it. But it's just to illustrate that in education at the moment, there's a push for children and young people with vision impairment to have two different aspects of education. What they call access to learning, which in other words is truly inclusive teaching, and at the same time to be taught to learn to access for themselves. That is, learn the specialist skills that they need to access information and become independent, as we've already mentioned. Collectively, this column is on the right is known as the expanded core curriculum. And there's ongoing research at the university to explore how to ensure that this is provided for all young people with vision impairment. We're not going to discuss all the other subjects, but as you can see, underlined, social, emotional function and self-advocacy skills are included in this. There's also a growing emphasis on the importance of all these topics from an early age as possible. This slide is not very easy to read, not very vision impairment friendly, but it's been put in here for your information. It's from a presentation at Birmingham University by Graham Douglas. In education, there is an emphasis on inclusion and equal access for all children and young people, and at the moment there's a particular push for children and young people with vision impairment to be provided with both access to learning, which is in the left-hand column, and that in other words is what they call truly inclusive teaching. This is just a list of some of the topics we've covered. This particular one is taken from Graham Douglas's presentation again at Birmingham University. It's just to get us thinking about the children and young people we work with. I'd like you to pick one person and how you might include some of these in your day-to-day teaching. We know there isn't time to have separate lessons, and most of these skills aren't learned by anyone in a formal teaching session, but more during the normal school day. We pick these things up in everyday life. All of these areas will be included in any assessment and advice from specialist teachers of vision impairment, and each child or young person might need more or less support with each. But for now, just think of one person, and under 2 or 3 of these headings, see if you can identify some skills they already have, and then maybe where they might need to learn some more. And how would you support that learning during the school day? As this isn't a live session, we can't go through all your answers here, but there is going to be a question and answer session planned at a later date. Details will be given at the end of this presentation. There will be some suggestions on the next few slides to see if your ideas match with any of those. But do feel free to bring any of your questions to the Q&A session. There's a few things to remember as well. As you know, independence only develops by having chances to take on increasing responsibility for yourself. You have to be able to take risks and make mistakes. It also involves close teamwork from everybody working with the child or young person with vision impairment to ensure they don't become dependent on others. Teachers and teaching assistants almost need to do themselves out of a job in a way, so that that young person doesn't need their assistance anymore. We're also expecting young people to advocate for themselves, so with all times we must respect what they tell us about their vision impairment and what they feel is best for them. Try not to impose what we think is best. Sometimes, when there are major disagreements on an important topic, there may need to be some discussion and compromise. One area needs additional specialist advice, and that's mobility. Only habilitation officers can provide this training. And normally, though, it only takes place about once a week over a period of several weeks, but it needs to be practiced at home and in school settings on a daily basis. So you will usually need to be included in any training as well, so that you can provide consistent support. I've split some of the ideas that we've got here into two different slides. One's applicable for early years and the other older age groups. So if this doesn't apply to you, you can skip this slide if you wish. A lot of these things I am aware you will already be doing in any early years or nursery setting, but there's some specific issues that you might need to think about for a child with vision impairment. To start with, you obviously find enjoyable activities that promote reciprocal interactions, and you'd be doing this anyway with all the children. You might need to give a child with vision impairment more opportunity to take the lead in a play situation. Sometimes you'll notice that children with vision impairment may sit back or sit on the outer edge of a group and listen to what's going on rather than take an active part in the activity. You could also interpret their actions by observing their facial expressions and behaviour and pass comment on this from time to time. And also give a running commentary on what's happening, what children are leaving and joining the group, what each one's doing at different times. It might be helpful to structure play activities with chances to experience real events. Children with vision impairment learn far better by doing. Remember, they're going to miss all the incidental learning that most children get from just observing what's going on around them. Even if adults facilitate this, they need lots of practice and lots of experiences to make up for the missing information. When offering choices of play activities, it might help to provide additional cues such as touch cues, tactile symbols, verbal prompts, or if they have useful vision, provide photographs of the actual activity, whichever suits the needs of that particular child. Arrange the environment to promote play and social engagement. I think most nurseries would already do this. You might want to think about the spacing for different areas of play, relaxation and things. You might need to model socially appropriate behaviour to encourage turn-taking, sharing, problem-solving. Some children might need physical modelling to help them understand some concepts. It can be tricky to work out when to intervene in a play situation and when to step back and let the children teach each other. You'll probably need to discuss this with the specialist VI teacher and work out the best way of doing it. To help develop an understanding of when a play activity is beginning, ending, or moving off to a new activity, it might be useful to use cues like a timer or something to give the child with a vision impairment the additional cues that children with vision will see happening. You might also, through modelling, teach children to engage in pretend play with real objects. Many children with vision impairment have difficulty developing imaginative play, so you might need some additional support with this. You can also use board games or card games that involve turn-taking and building social conversation skills. You might want to speak with the specialist teacher again about the suitable games for that particular child you're working with. For older children and young people, there's a lot of different situations that might arise. It's impossible to cover every possible scenario in this presentation. For more detailed information, there are a number of different formal assessments we can use of social skills. And there are more detailed ideas for teaching social skills that can be found in books on the subject. And I'll leave some references at the end of this presentation. One really good source of more detailed information is the Perkins School for the Blind in the US. They've produced some videos on social skills and teaching, and I'll leave a link to their website at the end if you're interested in watching any of those. You might not have heard of VIEW in this country. It's the organisation that promotes education for young people with vision impairment and supports QTBIs in their training and work. As it happens, the latest edition of their journal, called Teach, focuses on social and emotional issues. If you're really interested in this copy, you can get one from us. For some specific issues, you might need to discuss with Emma or Julie, the QTBIs at the moment, what would be the best approach. For example, the young person might need some specific teaching that they can provide as QTBIs. One example of some of the ideas in the journal is a program devised by a QTBI to teach self-advocacy skills and to improve self-esteem. She provided a series of one-to-one teaching sessions covering topics all about me, looking at what the young person was good at, their likes and dislikes, all about eyes and the visual system, aimed at their own age group and ability, which might include making a model or tactile diagrams, my eye condition, to make sure the young person understood their own vision impairment well enough to explain it to others, things that helped me, which included how to ask a teacher or friend if they needed something, how to deal with questions, which involved thinking of potential questions anyone might ask them and rehearsing answers. And the final session covered what I have learned, summarising the entire course. It was aimed at increasing their confidence in talking about their vision impairment, and it included an optional presentation to their peers and teachers. At different times, you might need to concentrate on some specific aspects of social behaviour or communication, and the specialist teachers will always be happy to advise on any of these. Things you might need to think about include how VI might impact on learning, how these can be taught without depending on visual information. How might these topics come up in day-to-day life? How do we give anyone constructive feedback about their social behaviour? Some ideas for teaching social skills include using role play, having a discussion on the subject, or using existing materials such as scripts to act out scenarios, or you could use video clips, for example from YouTube. For a light-hearted example, I've found a couple from Sesame Street that teach specific concepts such as empathy or explain emotions like anxious. I will leave the links to these on the next slide. The only thing you have to think about when using videos is to make sure that the information is not just visual. These particular two examples provide as much as you need in sound only. You don't need to be able to see what's on the screen to understand the concepts. So the best way to test out videos is just to listen to them and see if they have enough information to get the message across. This is just a list of top 5 tips that you might find useful to bear in mind. You can read through these for yourself. Other sources of support include NATSIP, the National Sensory Impairment Partnership. On their website you can find links to Think Right, Feel Good program of self-advocacy training and the materials needed for workshops. These aim to support young people with sensory impairments in developing their own self-advocacy skills through explaining their sensory impairment and needs in different situations, to constructively challenge unfairness whether intentional or unintentional, and challenge decision makers, which includes parents, carers and or teachers, so that they're able to be included in decision-making processes. These workshops have clear ground rules with options if some participants would rather not join in some aspects. They mainly use scenarios to discuss different possible situations and find a variety of ways to overcome the issues that arise. Our sensory support service were planning some of these workshops with deaf young people earlier this year, but they've been put on hold due to the school closures that have taken place, but will hopefully continue as soon as possible. The RNIB produce a number of materials. A particularly good one is their Tough Talks leaflet, mainly aimed at parents, but it's really useful for anyone who has to talk with a young person about their vision impairment. Just to summarise with a quote from the Teach journal I've already mentioned, one QTVI described in that how well-being comes from knowing that you have friends and family who accept you unconditionally and without judgment. It's knowing you're connected to and belong to a wider social network. It's feeling safe and secure, having a sense of purpose and a passion that drives you on towards your goals. Or as the World Health Organization puts it, you can work productively, fruitfully, able to make a contribution to your community. It's knowing your strengths and that you're on target to achieve your best. It's knowing your value and that you have a contribution to make and a role to fulfill. It's feeling hopeful about the future. If any one of these conditions is removed from the world of a child, it can put them at risk of mental health distress. It hasn't been possible to cover everything in these presentations, but the Sensory Support Service will always be available to provide specific advice or further training if requested. I've put all our contact details and the links I mentioned on the following slides. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's got you interested in the subject and thinking about things, and I hope you find it useful. Thank you.